Lionel, just to make sure, there's a button on the bottom right on translation.
Yes, I
Yes?
just
All right.
clicked that. It says English, so
Okay,
presumably that
perfect.
is automatic.
All right, perfect. Yeah, it has worked pretty well.
Good. Thank
Okay,
you.
so we'll start now. Buenos días al quinto y último día del taller El estado de la bioeconomía en Colombia, su avance y desafíos en 4 regiones en el marco de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Agradecemos que nos hayan acompañado hasta el día de hoy en estos 5 días de discusiones muy relevantes para la bioeconomía en Colombia y que nos han dejado grandes lecciones y caminos a seguir. Antes de iniciar el evento, daremos unas breves recomendaciones. Este evento cuenta con interpretación inglés-español. Esta función se encuentra en la parte inferior de la plataforma de Zoom. Podrán enviar sus preguntas a los panelistas escribiendo por el chat, especificando a quién va dirigida la pregunta y el moderador la comunicará al panelista. En caso de inconvenientes técnicos, por favor escribir en el chat privado al usuario llamado soporte técnico. Y por último, les recordamos que este evento está siendo grabado para beneficio de los invitados que no pudieron conectarse de forma sincrónica. En los próximos días les estaremos informando cómo poder acceder a las grabaciones de las charlas. Bueno, hoy continuamos con nuestra última jornada y vamos a hablar hoy de caminos a seguir en el marco de los ODS. Este es el último conversatorio sobre gobernanza de la bioeconomía y esperamos en este poder conectar las ideas anteriores con esta inclinación hacia la sostenibilidad que la bioeconomía nos ofrece. Y la idea pues es hablar un poco de la hoja de ruta de la bioeconomía en Colombia. Quisiera presentar a los panelistas invitados el día de hoy y agradecerles por su participación. Nuestra primera panelista es Elizabeth Hudson, quien es actualmente profesora emérita de la Facultad de Ciencias de la Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. Ella es miembro de número de la Academia Colombiana de Ciencias Exactas, Físicas y Naturales, miembro honorario del Comité Científico de la Fondazione Scuola Medica Salernitana de Italia, miembro del Ad Hoc Technical Expert Group en evaluación y manejo del riesgo del Protocolo de Cartagena de Bioseguridad, del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica. Es también miembro de la Comisión en Ética del Conocimiento Científico y Tecnología de la UNESCO y fue miembro de la ODS, miembro de la Misión Internacional de Sabios de Colombia en el 2019. Ella cuenta con un doctorado de la Universidad de Nottingham en Botánica y Manipulación Genética de Plantas. Ha sido consultora internacional en agrobiotecnología y bioseguridad de organismos genéticamente modificados, en biodiversidad y en bioeconomía. Ha editado 22 libros, presentado más de 33 capítulos científicos en libros y ha publicado más de 50 artículos científicos. A continuación voy a hablar en inglés para presentar a nuestro invitado que nos habla desde el Reino Unido, Lionel Clark. Lionel co-chairs the UK Engineering Biology Leadership Council, formerly called the UK Synthetic Biology Leadership Council, alongside ministerial co-chair Lord Callanan, who is Minister for Climate Change. He was an industrial board member guiding the generation of the UK bioeconomy strategy in December 2018, and currently sits as a member of the UK Bioeconomy Strategy Governance Group, reporting into the UK Government Department for Business, Environment and Industrial Strategy. Following a long career of industrial research and market deployment with Shell, ranging from the global phase-out of leaded gasoline through the development of advanced biofuels, he left in 2016 to set up his own bioenvironmental consultancy called Bioenergy, with a particular focus on the use of biochar as a potential negative emissions technology. He's a visiting professor in the Department of Bioengineering, Imperial College, London, and also in the Faculty of Chemistry in the University of Manchester. Thank you very much, Lionel, for your participation. We're very grateful to have you here. Y ahora va a pasar a español para presentar a nuestra moderadora del día, Federica Di Palma, quien estaba muy involucrada con la bioeconomía en Colombia. Ella es profesora asociada en biodiversidad de la Escuela de Ciencias Biológicas de la Universidad de East Anglia en el Reino Unido. Además, ocupa el cargo de directora científica y vicepresidenta de sectores en Genome, British Columbia, una organización de investigación sin fines de lucro que lidera la innovación genómica en la costa oeste de Canadá y facilita la adopción de la genómica en la sociedad. Dirige numerosos programas de investigación multidisciplinarios para países del Comité de Asistencia para el Desarrollo, destinados a generar asociaciones estratégicas, desarrollar la capacidad humana y de infraestructura y traducir el conocimiento científico en políticas y participación del sector privado para generar un impacto a largo plazo. Actualmente es la investigadora principal del proyecto Grow Colombia, del Global Challenges Research Fund y el proyecto Cluster del mismo fondo, llamado Enfrentando desafíos de política para una bioeconomía responsable basada en la biodiversidad de Colombia. Cabe anotar que este taller hace parte de este proyecto Clusters de GCRF y creo que no podríamos contar con unos invitados más apropiados para tener esta última jornada de reflexión sobre la gobernanza de la bioeconomía. Les agradecemos especialmente su participación y ahora cedo la palabra a Federica para que continúe con la conversación. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome everyone, and welcome Elizabeth, and welcome Lionel. This is going to be really a fantastic panel and a fantastic conversation. I'm very privileged to moderate this, and in particular very passionate about this topic of bioeconomy, particularly in Colombia, very close to my heart, as I have dedicated the last 5 years of my career to these international collaborations to make this happen, and to sustainable bioeconomies in general. I want to move forward right away with our program, and would like to invite Elizabeth to give her presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here. Let me see. Okay. Here we are. Are we okay with the presentation now?
We're seeing the PowerPoint screen. You may shift to full screen. Bueno, puedes pasar a pantalla completa. Listo, perfecto.
Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias por invitarme. Es un honor estar con estos copanelistas tan distinguidos y creo que tenemos una responsabilidad grande de tratar de coronar lo que se ha hecho durante toda la semana. Probablemente esté repitiendo buena parte de lo que se ha dicho, pero es que ya durante la semana se ha presentado el panorama general y los conceptos fundamentales de este paradigma, de este nuevo concepto de enfoque productivo que es el que debemos seguir. Un punto importante es el hecho de que la bioeconomía es el enfoque más conveniente para Colombia en este momento. Tal vez hemos debido acogerlo desde hace mucho tiempo, a pesar de que hace ya cerca de más de 10 años que venimos trabajando en el tema en Colombia. Pero el hecho es que el capital natural del país son los recursos naturales y su inmensa biodiversidad. También es un hecho que con esta pandemia comprobamos la enorme fragilidad de personas, empresas y sociedad para el acceso a bienes y servicios esenciales, y que hay una relación entre la diversidad, la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional con la salud planetaria y la zoonosis. Entonces es claro que tenemos, como se ha dicho durante toda la semana, que transformar los sistemas agroproductivos y de vida que tenemos en cadenas y redes de valor circulares, que tenemos que promover la agricultura sostenible, incrementando la resiliencia, reduciendo la deforestación. Este es uno de los puntos claves que tenemos que trabajar en el país, y enfrentando el cambio climático. ¿Cuáles son las líneas estratégicas hacia donde debemos tender, que es el objetivo de esta charla? Debemos buscar, para que haya mayor estabilidad y para que haya bienestar de toda la comunidad, generación de empleo y seguridad alimentaria, considerando tiempos difíciles como los que vivimos. Otro punto importante que quedó clarísimo es que el espacio rural era, es y será a futuro un lugar más salubre y seguro que las ciudades, y debemos hacerlos entonces eficientes y con todas las necesidades que tengan. Los objetivos generales de las líneas que debemos tomar son mejorar la productividad del agro con agricultura sostenible, regenerativa, eficiente y climáticamente inteligente. Y que debemos trabajar el sistema alimentario como un sistema global, integral, en cadenas de valor interrelacionadas, todas que tengan que ver con todas, así como lo hemos aprendido de la naturaleza. Todo es circular y todo se relaciona con todo. El hecho de que la actividad agropecuaria se reposiciona como un sector determinante para la recuperación de la economía mundial y directamente relacionado con seguridad alimentaria y nutricional. Y el otro punto fundamental es la reconstrucción del tejido social en el espacio rural. Con economía circular podemos hacer esto, podemos promover el bienestar regional y territorial, se reduce la tasa de migración, pero tenemos que tener conectividad y esto lo hemos vivido en los últimos 2 años. Es un sector que hay que fortalecer para que toda la comunidad tenga acceso a estos beneficios. También de todo lo que se ha hablado esta semana, vemos que es una oportunidad única para cambiar ese falso dilema de que crecimiento económico va contra el ambiente. Todo sistema económico actual, todo sistema productivo considera esencial la sostenibilidad y la principal responsabilidad que tenemos es proponer alternativas viables y efectivas. La agricultura sostenible y la bioeconomía están priorizadas en los modelos de recuperación actual que se están implementando. Obviamente incluye el aprovechamiento sostenible de los ecosistemas marino-costeros. Y el hecho de que ya dijimos usar la inteligencia biológica. Hacer lo que la naturaleza ha hecho durante millones de años, que es ser sostenible. Tener cadenas de valor que generen empleos y medios de vida adecuados mientras se asegure el aprovechamiento sostenible y la rehabilitación de la naturaleza ante el cambio climático. Me solicitaron que hiciera un resumen de las propuestas de retos, misiones y programas de la misión de sabios y cómo fue que trabajamos, al menos desde nuestro foco, bioeconomía, biodiversidad y medio ambiente, las propuestas para el desarrollo del país. La propuesta central de nuestro foco consistió en, dado que el marco conceptual y político para el desarrollo sostenible del país es la bioeconomía para un enfoque territorial en el marco grande, todo bajo los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. También que la biotecnología es la herramienta fundamental, el conocimiento científico, para conservar y adicionar valor a los recursos biológicos a través de su transformación. Y que es la oportunidad para el desarrollo territorial que nos sirve como complemento de las actividades productivas existentes. No es cambiar nada, es ajustarlo y enmarcarlo en un aspecto de sostenibilidad y cadenas integrales. Podemos diversificar esas actividades ya existentes, promover el valor agregado y hacerlas más sostenibles al aprovechar de manera responsable los recursos naturales y especialmente los desechos generados localmente, que es un punto que hay que atender, el procesamiento de residuos, y ya no debemos tener residuos. Tenemos coproductos que entran a otros ciclos productivos. La bioeconomía es, como lo hemos visto a lo largo de la semana, es transversal, regional e interdisciplinaria. El principio general es el desarrollo sostenible territorial usando el conocimiento para la protección y conservación de los recursos y de los sistemas de soporte a la vida, agua, aire, suelos, bosques. Tiene un gran potencial para hacer una transformación social e industrial a gran escala incorporando conocimiento e innovación tecnológica en los sistemas productivos a partir del uso sostenible de la biodiversidad y el manejo del medio ambiente. En la misión de Sabios trabajamos mucho el concepto de la investigación orientada por misión o innovación orientada por misión, en donde toda la comunidad plantea cuáles son los grandes problemas, cuáles son los problemas más importantes que hay que atender y se plantean grandes soluciones para grandes problemas. En esta investigación orientada por misión o innovación orientada por misión, tienen que participar todos los miembros de la comunidad. Ese es uno de los puntos importantes en donde tenemos que virar, porque todos tenemos que ser partícipes, todos somos responsables, no es culpa ni responsabilidad de uno solo, es todos que tenemos que actuar conjuntamente para esto. Entonces, esta investigación orientada por misión nos llevó a plantear 3 retos fundamentales para el desarrollo y el bienestar del país. La Colombia biodiversa, la Colombia productiva y sostenible y la Colombia equitativa, en donde de cada uno de estos retos se plantearon distintos programas o proyectos, distintas misiones que se propusieron. Para el reto Colombia biodiversa, por ejemplo, la misión era Colombia biodiversa y bioeconomía, la economía creativa, y la misión de agua y cambio climático, que es uno de los puntos fundamentales para el desarrollo del país. El reto de Colombia productiva y sostenible para un nuevo modelo productivo, sostenible y competitivo. Y el reto de Colombia equitativa con las misiones de conocimiento e innovación para la equidad y educar con calidad para el crecimiento, la equidad y el desarrollo humano. Esto es un ejemplo de cómo trabajamos por ejemplo, el reto de Colombia biodiversa, que busca es un modelo de economía sostenible basado en la diversidad natural y cultural, porque también integramos toda la parte cultural, social, económica, etc. De aquí sacamos 2 misiones, como les dije, la misión Colombia diversa y bioeconomía, economía creativa, y la misión agua y cambio climático, en donde, como ven, podemos desglosar con distintos programas o proyectos que se vuelven casi que infinitos, pero que permiten que toda la sociedad se vaya incorporando a esto. Por ejemplo, tenemos el repositorio de patrimonio cultural y natural, programas de investigación para la conservación de la biodiversidad, pesca y acuicultura responsables, nueva revolución industrial y manufacturera. Es decir, son muchísimos los programas que se pueden generar, pero lo importante es que se integren para una gran misión que es el de Colombia biodiversa. Aquí también simplemente más ejemplos de cómo planteamos que puede hacer, por ejemplo, a través de convocatorias de innovación abierta en patrimonio natural y cultural, la estructuración del Museo de Historia Natural y Cultural de Colombia, generar un banco de bioproductos, es decir, las posibilidades son casi que infinitas. Para el caso de Colombia productiva y sostenible, nos basamos en cadenas de valor o redes productivas para desarrollos de nuevos bioprocesos, servicios, etcétera, todo con incorporación de conocimiento, con innovación científica y tecnológica para el desarrollo territorial que pasa al ámbito nacional. Ahora, como complemento de todo esto, el Ministerio de Ciencias propuso la misión Bioeconomía Colombia como apuesta de país para el desarrollo y se alinea con los compromisos de reactivación económica. Tiene compromisos con crecimiento limpio, generación de empleo para los más pobres y vulnerables, el campo, y una serie de multiplicadores que llevan a aumentar productividad, sostenibilidad a nivel regional, fortalece las cadenas de valor. El caso es que el Ministerio de Ciencia y Tecnología en Colombia, Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación, perdón, lanzó esta misión Bioeconomía Colombia como una de sus programas bandera para promover el desarrollo del país. Busca incorporar ecosistemas terrestres y acuáticos sanos, la biotecnología, la producción de biomasa, cero desperdicios, el agroproductivo y sostenible y una Colombia biointeligente en una articulación, en un engranaje que favorezca esa integración de los sistemas agroproductivos. Como resumen de todo lo que hemos visto de bioeconomía durante toda la semana, les presento esta integración de lo que en nuestro foco de la misión de sabios consideramos que es la bioeconomía, que nos incluye economía circular, que son las flechas azules, y bioeconomía, que es la incorporación de conocimiento a través de las biotecnologías para los distintos procesos, partiendo de la biodiversidad, producción de biomasa, pasamos por bioenergía, alimentos y piensos, bioproductos, procesamiento y biotecnologías, con cero residuos. Ese es el punto de la sostenibilidad de la bioeconomía. Finalmente, quiero mostrarles este enfoque que me parece bien interesante de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, no en la forma plana en que nos los presentan siempre, sino integrados entre sí, ver las interrelaciones de cómo con las condiciones de la biosfera y los objetivos de desarrollo planteados para esto, pasamos a todas las actividades de la sociedad con sus objetivos y ya directamente a lo que es la economía. Si integramos y logramos fusionar muy bien todo esto, vamos a tener un objetivo de desarrollo sostenible adicional, que es el 17, que son las sociedades felices. Muchas gracias. Finalmente, porque también estamos haciendo énfasis en lo que es gobernanza, y ya vimos, a partir de lo que pusimos en la misión, el ministerio está trabajando en la misión Bioeconomía Colombia, el Departamento Nacional de Planeación con otras instancias gubernamentales están trabajando en la propuesta de la estrategia de Bioeconomía Colombia, pero yo creo que el mejor resumen de lo que es la gobernanza, de lo que debe ser la gobernanza, lo tenemos aquí. Tenemos es que normalmente vemos que cada uno tira para su lado, pero si nos reunimos y trabajamos en conjunto, un trabajo en equipo nos va a dar una muy buena gobernanza y nos va a permitir realmente trabajar hacia el futuro sostenible, hacia el desarrollo que nos permita el bienestar de toda la población. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. This was a great summary, and I think you've made some extremely relevant point about the state of bioeconomy. I look forward to our discussion, conversation, and also field the questions from our audience. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce now Professor Lionel Clark presentation, and then we can move to questions and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can share my screen and hope everybody can hear me. Yes, here we are. There. Can you see and hear everything? So, I would like to say, first of all, thank you very much to invite me to this. I'm delighted and honored to be able to speak to you today. I had the pleasure of visiting Colombia 2 years ago and engaging with a number of people and groups discussing the development of the bioeconomy in Colombia. And we felt it was helpful both to compare and contrast the experience we have had with developing the bioeconomy in the UK. Clearly, the UK has a very different economic and structural basis. So it's interesting to see which themes are nevertheless very similar, and maybe to just compare and suggest some things that we are doing which may or may not be relevant. So I'd like, first of all, just to reflect on the origins of thinking about the bioeconomy. And surely one of the most iconic images of the last century, indeed just over 50 years ago, was that wonderful set of photographs from Apollo 11 back in July 1969. When for the first time we knew what the Earth looked like, and yet there was something of enormous impact when we saw it from a distance. There are many, many ideas and developments that resulted from that. The environmental movement had already preceded that with a number of movements there. But an interesting one I wanted to mention here was the Club of Rome in 1971, published their view on the fact that they saw the planet Earth as a very interconnected system. And we've heard that theme of interconnectivity in Elizabeth's previous presentation to us. But it should not surprise us where we find ourselves today, even from predictions from 50 years ago. At the time, they looked at, for example, the growth in CO2, and extrapolated 40 years into the future. And they predicted that by the year 2000, CO2 in the atmosphere could be as high as 380 parts per million. But they said, surely by then we will have found alternatives to fossils so that we don't reach that point. Needless to say, my hand extrapolation of that to date does indeed show that they were pretty good at their prediction, and indeed the latest figures from January are 415 parts per million. So the image today is not one of the planet, but surely is this graph or something similar. It shows that business as usual is not sustainable, that defossilization and introduction of negative emissions technologies are going to be key to climate stabilization and protecting the ecosystem. That, of course, was very much the basis of the Paris Agreement at COP20 back in December 2015. And surely enough, everyone, the politicians and representatives there were delighted to have got an international agreement and pan-national commitments to addressing that issue. Sadly, however, if we follow the data coming out from Mauna Loa in Hawaii, we see that even since COP20, there's been no perceptible reduction in the rate of increase of CO2 into the atmosphere. Clearly, these promises alone have not been enough. Indeed, if we look at the 1.5 degree IPCC target and go into some of the data they presented, there's a rather shocking graph there which indicates that emissions of CO2 would need to decline at a dramatic rate, almost inconceivable, if we are to approach that target. So there is so quite simply, something isn't working. And we're seeing amongst many young people in the world and many of all ages, an increasing concern over what can be done. I think the first point I want to make is this idea of interconnectivity. We've seen how the world is interconnected, and really that also means collective responsibility. As we heard from Elizabeth, this isn't about one group or another. That we need to see what can be done collectively. Also, we need transformative, not incremental change. Why isn't this occurring? And there are many reasons. And in general, I would summarize them as that markets are very conservative. It's difficult when you have a system in place to just change it. People are used to doing things in certain ways. Supply chains are very established and so on. If you try to change them, they tend to revert to where they started. There are vested interests that would see themselves as losing out if there were a major change. And there is inevitable short-termism. What is good to do in the short term may not be the best thing for the long term. And all of those together resist that change. So what needs to be different? Well, here are just a few suggestions. Firstly, clearly to focus on solutions, not problems. The climate change protesters are making a very important point, but protest alone doesn't help unless we can then work out what to do and who can help do that. Something I've found in many different situations over the years is even if the people at the top of the organization set out to do something different and people, for example, in the research area can see what can be done, somehow the commercial decision making in the middle might well still be based on outdated paradigms which are based on the sort of fossil fuel economics and the like. And really we have the whole system, including the criteria for decision making, also need to be reviewed, not just the targets. It's a major transformative step, but clearly we need to take short-term steps, but they need to be bold, clearly directed towards a long-term vision. And in terms of that interconnectivity, it is everyone involved. So we build public confidence, encourage private investment. Industry must see that it is worth investing in new and transformative ways so that they can help collectively society move forward. As an example from the UK, we see that government intervention is ultimately essential to steer markets towards profitable, sustainable solutions for the long term. You cannot just rely on markets because markets tend to be driven by the short term profit. The UK, for example, was the first major nation to commit to net zero emissions by 2050. Even though I think, to be honest, we didn't have a clear idea of how we would get there. We just knew we had to. And that setting of a vision does indeed then unleash innovation as many industries and scientists start to map out what they think is required. We heard earlier, and I'll repeat this very much, the UK experience is one in which we can indeed and have significantly reduced our greenhouse gas emissions to date. There's a reduction of as high as 44% total change over the last 30 years. But at the same time, our GDP, our economy has grown by 77% in the same period. It is entirely possible to grow the economy and to improve our greenhouse gas emissions. Some key bioeconomy levers I would suggest today are certainly we have to look very hard at how biomass must become increasingly important as a sustainable feedstock. Fossil fuels, coal, are often thought of in terms of energy, but they're also critical building blocks. They're a basis for molecules, those for jet fuel, for chemicals, materials, some vital parts of the clothes we wear, even many medicines come from petrochemicals. If we're going to get away from fossil, biomass has to play a role. Revolutionary advances in the biosciences are taking part, and you heard from the introduction, I'm responsible in the UK for mapping our synthetic biology, and increasingly we're calling it engineering biology as it extends its range of applications. And many see this as perhaps the key scientific development of the 21st century. There's a shifting market pull for more sustainable solutions, and this should not be overlooked. It may not be immediately apparent, but particularly if you look at the US, you'll see major changes and multi-billion-dollar investments in plant-based meats, cell-based proteins and other approaches, both for human consumption directly or as fish foods and so on, right the way through to the textile industry looking for lower environmental impact. And the other fourth point I would make really is about the connections, the fact that security, food security, land use, soil health, and so on are all connected in some way, and that we need to find ways to address all of those simultaneously. So, and again, going back to the UK, we've had a series of different policies. I wanted to address this briefly. This isn't just about setting out a vision and working at it for 10 or 20 or 30 years, but rather responding constantly. And the world is changing. So we need a policy which is both appropriate, but also can respond and adapt. The Life Sciences Industrial Strategy, launched 3 years ago, very much is the foundation of our scientific basis. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been delighted that we had that technology available to respond with rapid vaccine and diagnostics developments. With that technology, which is a core part of the UK response to the bioeconomy, we have been looking at other issues. And of course, you'll be aware of Brexit, our shift away from a pan-European approach to things like regulation. And we're actively looking at whether there may be opportunities to streamline regulatory approval processes so that we can help to improve crop breeding in response to climate change and other challenges. And of course, this year we have COP26, and a third policy here is very much around those responses, and clearly the bioeconomy will play a major role in that. So we see how we build policy upon policy, and we continue to adapt and change as opportunities and challenges present themselves. Again, one has to be transparent. The same data that showed how the UK economy has improved whilst reducing greenhouse gases also revealed there were some things which were not being properly addressed. For example, international aviation bunkers, which is a major aspect. Heathrow Airport is a major hub in the world, and those emissions were continuing to increase in the background. And so recognizing that, responding with major initiatives to develop advanced biojet would be just such a response. The first thing is to recognize the issue and then to be clear what needs to be done. I spoke earlier about the scientific biosciences, synthetic biology and the like. I'd like to just dwell briefly on the engineering biology of the agri-food area, the sorts of examples of work that is now being looked at, how crops can generate more nutritious food, how we can develop crops more resilient to climate change, how crops and forests can be more resilient to pathogens, how crops can be developed with a lower carbon footprint, less dependence upon high carbon nitrogen, carbon footprint, not nitrogen fertilizers, how we can get the circular economy going, how we can even use plants as factories for vaccines, and indeed how we can just use bioscience in a more enclosed way to ferment alternative food and feed proteins that will take pressure off land use. So these are all options which we can start to consider in this. I'd like briefly, and I will declare personal interest, it was in the introduction of my interest in biochar. I'd just like to share with you one slide as to why I think this needs to continue to be viewed more carefully. This is a chart that comes from the IPCC 1.5 degree paper from a couple of years ago, and they point out that in order to develop negative emission technologies, three key areas are the afforestation, reforestation area, the increase of soil carbon for sequestration, and biochar. My argument is that these should all be interconnected. And that's really an area that I've been looking at how they can be connected. We can start to see soil as a carbon sink, even though it's currently degrading in most parts of the world. It's a basis of crop fertility. So again, we need to understand what that soil requires. If we have the good soil, then so much can be generated from it. The circular agroeconomy we heard earlier. There is actually, the biochar can actually be used as a soil improver, and it can even help catalyze long-term benefits, not just that. And one is well aware of the Amazonian dark earths. And it's increasingly possible to consider small units, which will allow this technology to be put out into communities and distributed. So it starts to put negative emission technologies more into the hands of rural communities and not totally dependent on major international developments and high tech. The relationship with SDGs is important. I particularly like a paper I read recently by Hyman, in which he explored the bioeconomy in a European context. Looking at it more closely, I think that I could map all the technologies being developed in the UK bioeconomy against at least 15 of the 17 SDGs there. That's just, I think, just where we are today. But one point that I thought he made very clearly, and which I fully agree with, is it's easy to talk about a bioeconomy as using bio to make money, but it's important that it is also within a sustainable framework. So bioeconomy is not automatically sustainable. We need to bring those two in our thinking. One final, two slides, just very briefly. We talk about how the UK has managed the bioeconomy. In my own area, we've been fortunate to set up an independent panel, of which I'm the chairman. I'm not employed by the government. I sit entirely independently as an advisor, but the government have always ensured the senior minister is engaged and shows their support as a co-chairman. The other point about having politicians as co-chairman is they keep changing. And in order to maintain continuity and long-term view, the presence of our council has helped to ensure that has been achieved. And Lord Callanan, as we mentioned, is my current co-chairman, and he's the Minister for Climate Change in the United Kingdom. So, final slide. I think the bioeconomy must be economics-based, but also sustainability-driven. Government policy and proactivity is essential to steer essential changes in market demand and opportunities. A key role, however, does exist for scientists and industrialists, both to demonstrate opportunities and to invest in those innovations. An engagement of independent, multi-stakeholder councils aids continuity, knowledge-led updating, away from the short-term politico-economic pressures that our politicians and governments are inevitably under. And therefore, I hope collectively, we all take our role in taking responsibility to drive this forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lionel. Can you hear me? Just making sure that people can hear me well.
I can.
Excellent. Thank you, Lionel, and thank you for these wonderful contributions. I mean, this been very, very informative, and many common themes towards building a sustainable bioeconomy and what that really means. And for certain, we have highlighted some important aspects of this, which I also believe very firmly. And sustainability cannot be separated, from the economic as well, have to happen, I think, in concert. There's been a lot of questions that have come for the two of you, and many, really highlight this sustainable bioeconomy to be a push that is growth and societal growth and an opportunity, which is sometimes a link that we find difficult to make. I believe that everything is becoming interconnected. I believe that this pandemic, whether devastating and tragic, has also brought us our attention on how we no longer can consider innovation in human health, economic medicine separately from innovation in the environment.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We're hearing some echo from on your side. Just so you.
I'm not hearing it, and I'm not quite sure what I can do. Does everybody hear this echo? Yeah. Well, I can try and take my headphones off and see if that helps.
Let's try this way. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, now I can't hear you, but okay.
Maybe you want to try to log out and log in?
No, I'm okay like this. Let's go. Let's move forward. I was just, these things happen, is our new virtual world. So what I was saying is that this pandemic has really demonstrated to us that we can no longer consider innovation in genomic medicine and human health separately from innovation in the environment. It has demonstrated that there's a tight link in the way that we interact with this environment. And therefore, in particularly for Colombia, the sustainable use of biodiversity, or what we refer to it now as the nature-based solutions, are extremely important to drive this economy. I was also part of the Mission de Sabios with Elizabeth, and it was a real privilege. Lionel said something extremely important. These things cannot happen without government buy-in and intervention. And I think that one of the things that Colombia has done remarkably well, and it's the government buy-in, even across, because I have seen this happen across 2 administrations so far. It's certainly not been easy, it's been complex, but I think that the bottom-up approach and the strong link to the Ministry of Science and the program that the Ministry of Science has led has been really something to admire, and a good approach that Colombia has taken. How can we take it further? How can we make this bioeconomy truly thrive at the regional level? Many questions have arrived, and so I'm going to start with Elizabeth. A couple of questions, Elizabeth, that go back to this tight link between economy, society, and environment. Has traditional knowledge, as a member of the audience asked, has traditional knowledge been included in these thoughts?
Sí. Realmente de todo lo que hablamos, es que es muy corto el tiempo para hablar de todo, pero estamos hablando es de convergencia de conocimientos, de convergencia de tecnologías, de convergencia de saberes. Para quienes tengan tiempo o interés, yo creo que pueden acceder al informe completo de la Misión de Sabios y ver las propuestas de nuestro foco, en donde evidentemente buscábamos, porque reconocimos que el saber tradicional era muy importante para integrar todo esto, especialmente si estamos hablando de desarrollo regional, de desarrollo territorial. Entonces, los conocimientos locales son de gran importancia. Y de hecho, en varias partes de nuestro informe reconocimos el papel primordial que las comunidades han jugado, por ejemplo, para la conservación y uso sostenible de los recursos. Entonces, por supuesto que estamos hablando de convergencia de saberes, de respeto por aquellas prácticas que nos han enseñado nuestras comunidades, que han sido las mejores protectoras y conservadoras de nuestros recursos. Entonces, bueno, yo creo que ahí resumo nuestra posición en relación con esto.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I just want to address one more question, I think, that has arrived several times, actually, from several people. And I know the answer, and so I would like to ask you to give this answer. And that is, the Misión de Sabio has, of course, not to overlook oceans and the importance of oceans in this bioeconomy. Could you say something about that?
Sí, de hecho, y también se menciona varias veces, la bioeconomía azul y la importancia, especialmente para un país como Colombia, que tiene 2 océanos y tantos recursos hídricos, la importancia de todo esto de la bioeconomía azul como fuente de proteínas, como sistemas mismos para entrar dentro de todo el círculo, la misma producción de microalgas. Y de hecho, una de las misiones, si recuerdan la diapositiva donde estábamos en azules y verdes, ahí está el estudio y producción sostenible en mares y océanos. Sí, se le ha dado mucha importancia porque además actualmente en soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, yo formo parte del grupo científico del Food System Summit. Estamos trabajando mucho todo esto como fuente alternativa importantísima de proteína para la alimentación, para la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional. Entonces, sí, no ha sido suficientemente estudiado, pero sí hay que fortalecerlo y sí está considerado. I don't know if you want to complete the answer.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I just would like to summarize what we have heard a little bit and also a bit of my thoughts, and that is for sure the pillars of a sustainable bioeconomy are going to be, our ability to secure food for the future, our ability to generate renewable resources, our ability to maintain a resilient ecosystem. All 3 things extremely interconnected and absolutely dependable by innovation and technology. However, I would like to refer to this as responsible innovation, because this is a word that I'm extremely fond of. And there are a couple of questions related to this that I would like to field to Lionel. And maybe, and also afterwards, I hear from Elizabeth as well. I think one of the questions is too much of the conventional way of looking at economy is based on GDP. And this is no longer going to basically fit in this future of sustainable bioeconomy. And there is a really interesting question here about ecosystem services and what are all the non-economic benefits of ecosystem. I think we are at a moment where we have a tremendous opportunities to value what we have considered so far these non-economic benefits. Lionel, do you have something to add to this, and followed by Elizabeth, please?
Thank you very much. I think this is a very important point, and I try to give some hints on that in my talk. Without a doubt, if we had only focused on GDP, we would invariably keep going back to fossil fuels and coal for energy and so on. We know that is not right. The fact that in the case of the UK, they said they made a commitment to net zero overwrites that. That is not expressed in economic terms. It is a shorthand for a value on greenhouse gases and the like. So there's a very clear example of something which has a huge influence on the way one operates, and then basically you create as a government a different but level playing field for everyone, and it's about a level playing field. So then all future industries now know that they have to compete on that. And so that incentivizes innovation in that way. Clearly, and I would completely agree, and I would be very interested, I have seen some ideas, but I've not seen them work through, what might be an additional biodiversity or ecosystem measure other than greenhouse gas that could create a similar non-GDP related basis. And I think that is more difficult because of the complexity. It's not that you can't do it, it just gets messy and therefore difficult, I think. But that one thing I think we've noticed, I don't know if we will revert in the future, but there's been something extraordinary with the COVID-19 last year, when a lot of people have commented about recognizing the interconnections between people around the world. People have started looking at helping each other and finding solutions which are not based purely on economics. People have started to look at things slightly differently. It's just a step in the right direction. I think it reminds us that people can and will respond given the right sort of metrics and right opportunity. And then just very, very briefly, from my personal experience working in Shell, as we say, I was developing fuels for all around the world, including South America, doing a lot of work in Brazil, in fact, and Argentina in particular, which were my bigger markets. And back in 2003, I went and gave a talk first at the World Fuel Conference in Houston, then another one in Stuttgart to the German motor manufacturers. And I got very aggressive feedback from people who thought that I was going to be somehow undermining existing business. And then I said, well, yes, but we can introduce biofuels, which we will need to do. But by the way, they will cost more. There's no way you can sow a seed, harvest the land, take the crops, convert them, and produce a fuel as quickly and easily as you can suck oil that's been sitting around for 64 million years, turning itself into an almost perfect fuel economically. And therefore there have to be those differences. And there again, once you have a biofuel mandate, Brazil's an exception in that case, as it happens, just for other reasons. But basically, you needed some sort of government mandate to say, we mandate you have 5% ethanol or 10% or whatever the thing is. Then you have a level playing field, then you move forward. So a long answer, but I hope it illustrates in real measures how we need that. Level playing field is key, and then everyone can innovate at that new level.
Thank you, Lionel. And Elizabeth, I'd really like to hear from you, because I do believe that the question that I've asked is really key for Colombia to actually, Colombia has an opportunity to demonstrate here the value of these non-economic benefits. Can you tell us a bit more about it, please?
Sí. Lo que pasa es que también quiero agrandar el ámbito de todo esto. Quiero retomar algo que dijo Lionel, y es sobre que tenemos que dar un cambio transformativo. No es incrementar nada, no, es un cambio absoluto, una modificación total de sistemas productivos, de sistemas de vida, de valores. Tenemos que revisar nuestros valores. Entonces, he ahí la importancia del entorno político que de verdad facilite y promueva todos estos cambios. En relación con los servicios ecosistémicos, por supuesto que es uno de los componentes primordiales en todo esto, el concepto de bioeconomía, y por eso dije, es el momento de cambiar esa idea de que desarrollo va en contra de sostenibilidad y de recursos naturales y del entorno, porque lo que hacemos es integrar todo. Los servicios ecosistémicos están directamente relacionados con la resiliencia, que es de lo que estamos hablando todo este tiempo. Estamos hablando de suelo, agua, biodiversidad y todos los servicios, todos los beneficios que recibimos de todo esto, y de que si de verdad queremos nuestro enfoque de desarrollo por el modelo de bioeconomía, que no es una disciplina, no es una ciencia, no, es un sistema de vida, es una filosofía. Si queremos ir por el lado de bioeconomía, lo primero que tenemos que hacer es conocer y proteger todo nuestro entorno. Entonces, no va en contra del entorno, va precisamente a favorecer y a proteger el entorno. Y nosotros somos un país privilegiado en todos estos recursos y los servicios ecosistémicos están siendo valorados y están siendo cuantificados, aunque es algo bastante difícil de hacer. Pero sí, y hay interés político y hay movimiento en el gobierno para promover esto, para cambiar la tendencia de la demanda de mercados hacia soluciones sostenibles. Ese sería el resumen.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is an important and really interesting topic, and I think you know what you've said it's pivotal, and I don't really want to minimize it. I do want to propose, however, sort of a practical way forward, and that is. From what I have learned from my experiences, we're working on this international and multidisciplinary program, in particularly of late in Colombia, that when we refer to a holistic approach to sustainable bioeconomy or nature-based solutions, we need to really be multidisciplinary. But in order for that to happen, we need to have all this expertise right from the beginning around the table. In my last 7 years, have heard so many of these talks, so many people saying we're multidisciplinary, so many people, and nobody really, very few people actually understanding how to carry this out. The stakeholders need to be at the table. In the Colombia example, the stakeholders are all the communities that are important, that they are the primary actors in this sustainable bioeconomy. We go from the indigenous community to the farmers, to the producers, the government, the regional representation, we need everyone around the table. And in a way, if we do that, we understand how to activate these incentives from a policy level. And we understand how to activate these policy switches that will get us closer to what we want to do. Because otherwise, we're never going to be able to get a handle on this. So with what I have said, and I know this firsthand from the work that we are doing, but I want to understand also, I want to bring this point and relate it to what Lionel was saying, and I would like to know both of your opinions on this. You know, there's been debated whether we need to transform the economy in a disruptive way, or whether this is an incremental. And there's people, one way think it should be disruptive, one way people think that it's incremental. But the history of economy has so far shown us that it's very rarely disruptive. It's mostly incremental. And these policy switches in a country as complex and as with all of its regions and its ecosystems in the regions as Colombia, I can't imagine, you know, that the solution is just one and in a disruptive way. So I just guess I put this out there for hearing your opinion, and maybe you have some insight on this. Lionel, if you'd like to start, please.
Thank you. No, I think this is such an important thing. I hope I gave some clues to that in my presentation introduction. We have to be disruptive. You only have to look at the change from current practice and greenhouse gas emissions to know that we have to almost reverse everything we've been doing for 100 years. So much of what our current economy has thrived on has been based on coal and oil and the like. They are still today the major exports from Colombia, I believe. They have been quite enormous. And when you want to disrupt, you or at least to transform, then you inevitably need to be disruptive. And the reason for that is, again, this systemic interconnection, the fact that supply chains link to the suppliers to processors, the processors to end markets, the ways that people purchase things. They don't like change, they like the familiar. Suddenly we're saying business as usual is not going to work. If we continue this way, unfortunately, all the systems that we've depended on in recent decades and maybe the last 100 years or so will no longer work well. So we have to disrupt, and yet how can you do that whilst changing everything at the same time? So this is where I think finding niche examples and then expanding them. We have a way of doing both. We may be small steps, but highly disruptive, where people then can start to take the change. One thing that has surprised me, I remember talking many years ago about how on earth could we turn to a bioeconomy without stopping the production of food or requiring a far more land and destroying sensitive regions. And that remains an enormous challenge. And clearly incremental change cannot do that. And someone said, well, the whole world will have to stop eating meat. You know, everyone will have to become a vegetarian. And I said, that's just no way. I cannot believe that will ever happen. And I certainly was not a vegetarian myself. And yet I found over the last few years, I've been amazed at how that idea, even so at least a flexitarian diet, has suddenly become very, very popular now, and even the restaurants here will offer plant-based alternatives to popular foods, and every restaurant now provides them, and more people, and that for me has been a surprising change, and it shows that actually if you can introduce things which are disruptive, maybe you can step by step get a bigger transformation. Just one example, but maybe I'll stop at that point and hand over to Elizabeth on that one.
Bueno, definitivamente creo que sí tenemos que ser disruptivos. La pandemia nos dio un pellizco muy fuerte y tenemos que responder. Nos dio muy duro, pero nos dio la oportunidad también de cambiar. Pero, como ya lo dijo Lionel y Federica, fundamentalmente es un cambio de actitud. Cambio de actitud de todos los participantes, de todos los miembros de la sociedad. Y sí, tenemos que enfocarlo desde una forma holística. Parte de lo que nos quedó claro con el ejercicio que hicimos en la misión es que estas soluciones deben ser acogidas, pensadas, y la sociedad debe empoderarse de eso. Es decir, no hay un solo modelo, depende de cada región, depende de cada territorio que conoce sus capacidades, sus recursos, su potencial, sus culturas, y todo esto debe ser respetado. Es decir, estas soluciones tienen que salir de la base hacia arriba. Lo que tan elegantemente llaman bottom-up, eso es lo que tenemos que buscar, pero sí, tiene que ser disruptivo y tenemos que cambiar de actitud y aprender a salir de la zona de confort. Tenemos que cambiar radicalmente, tenemos que cambiar nuestra mente, hacer un cambio total de chip para poder enfocar y asumir en forma responsable todos estos sistemas que nos van a modificar radicalmente 250 años que llevamos de la industrialización y todos los efectos más fuertes de la última era del antropoceno.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I have one more question on this topic, and then I want to move on the conversation, but Lionel, you did mention about a market pool. And I think that this is a complex question. And I wanted to ask you, with your experience, and then also hear from Elizabeth with the context of Colombia. What can we do to actually shift this market? Because the reality is that not even in our Western societies, we're not doing this very well. Perhaps there is now a much more, of course, perhaps things are changing now, and there is an understanding that we need to move in a certain direction. But if we look at history again, if industry proposes, normally the more sustainable solutions, there isn't really a big market for them. Industry normally are small. They don't have a lot of money to resource the change in technology. Yes, the market is conservative, as you said, and we have continued to invest, in what's already there, in what's already profitable, despite it perhaps is not so sustainable, and instead it's damaging our environment. How do we shift? How do we get a market pull for this?
Yes, I mentioned market pull. I found myself focusing increasingly on that effect in the last couple of years. When I started looking at synthetic biology, which for many people is the sort of leading edge of applying genetic knowledge into areas in medicine and healthcare, but beyond to the wider economy. Initially, people were saying, "Oh, this is just a sort of academics and scientists doing research, and it's all very frightening. And why are you doing it? Because we don't need you." And then I would say 10 years later, then when we're seeing young people, whether it's Greta Thunberg or whoever as an example, saying, look, we're young people, we expect you to do something radically different. We know that there is an increasing appetite and an inevitability that the younger generation will be far more sensitive to and much more expectant of different solutions. But what I'm seeing in the meantime is, for example, this is actually filtering through industry. So increasing number of industries are now themselves declaring that they want to be net zero by some date, 2050 or whatever, and that they are saying, right, what are the solutions? What can we buy into if we can't do it ourselves, or who can help us? The chemical industry is trying to get to lower carbon, and if it's based entirely on fossil, it's going to have to change. So there's a sort of reflection between expectation of future markets, and a lot of industries looking 10 or 20 years into the future. And thinking, will we still be a viable industry? We need to start investing now to scale up. So a lot of industry is looking, and people don't normally realize that the industry is often looking further into the future than many, the general public or most politicians, in fact, because they want to know what to invest in today. I mentioned the shift towards vegetarianism, veganism, flexitarianism, and increasing sustainability of the food. They're now saying, okay, where's it come from? Is it from a good source, or have we destroyed a tropical rainforest to provide this? Has this got a, so people are thinking about it in their day-to-day food. And the textile industry is an interesting one. There has been an increasing recognition that textile industry is one of the, I think possibly the second biggest polluter of the oceans of any industry in the world. It's because of the nature of the dyeing process and the chemicals and the water treatments they use. And they've been coming and saying, what can we do to have more biological, more benign, more appropriate ways of working? So I think it's across the whole piece. I'm hearing a pull And that's when we also shifted from synthetic biology to engineering biology, just as a language to say, this is now responding to the market and not just an academic interest of looking for a problem. We're trying to find solutions to the problems that are being given to us.
Thank you. Elizabeth, in addressing this question, can I also ask you, because we've got a lot of questions about this from the audience, can I also ask you to comment if the mission, what are in the Misión de Sabios the key indicators for succeeding in this, in the establishment of this bioeconomy? Thanks.
Bueno, se hace más compleja cada vez, hay más que decir. En el punto de el tipo de demanda sobre los productos, etcétera, yo creo que la pandemia nos dejó claro que podemos volver a soluciones simples y a través de la digitalización facilitó el contacto del consumidor con el productor directamente. Desaparecieron algunos intermediarios y esto funcionó relativamente bien, al menos en este país, en ciertas regiones. El punto también es que en Colombia, yo creo que cerca de la mitad de las personas acceden directamente a los mercados, no a supermercados muy elegantes donde hay un semiprocesamiento o esto, sino acceden directamente a los productores o si acaso a uno o dos intermediarios a través de los mercados locales y las centrales de abastos, todo esto. Entonces ahí no hubo tanto cambio, pero también hay que pensar en varios puntos. Lo ideal es tener ese contacto más o menos directo del productor con el consumidor, que no haya tanto intermediario, pero también tenemos que pensar que hay que adicionar conocimiento para la conservación de productos perecederos que se cosechan en mayor cantidad en ciertos momentos del año y favorecer el desarrollo de la industria con ciencia y tecnología. Lo importante, hemos dicho, es la adición de valor in situ, que el procesamiento o transformación de los productos se realice localmente para que los beneficios sean para las comunidades locales. Igualmente, adicionar ciencia y tecnología, y yo creo que nunca se hace suficiente énfasis en esto, para el procesamiento de desechos, la valorización de desechos y que no volvamos a hablar de residuos, sino que tenemos coproductos que entran a otros sistemas de transformación y de proceso. Entonces, ciencia y tecnología nos sirven mucho para toda esta producción. Repito, en la misión, en el informe de la misión de sabios, sí planteamos algunos indicadores. Infortunadamente, sí, porque es el indicador económico, dijimos que se incrementara el Producto Bruto Interno, entonces que el resultado de estas actividades hicieran un incremento importante en el PIB, sobre todo desde el punto de vista de la producción agrícola, pero también hablamos de un porcentaje de incremento en empleos generados precisamente a través de este procesamiento, de esta industrialización, de la transformación tanto de productos agrícolas como de desechos. Entonces sí, hay algunos indicadores, algunas metas que están propuestas para el año 2030 y para el año 2050. Entonces es cuestión de acudir, pero por supuesto que para todo esto de tener retos y misiones, hay que tener indicadores que nos muestren cómo sí está respondiendo a ese problema que se planteó.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I would like to answer, and I would like for you to comment as well, Elizabeth, again, on another question on the Misión de Sabio, because I do think that this is really important to address. I was part of the Mission de Sabios with you and many other experts, and there's been a lot of work that has gone into the Mission de Sabios. And I believe the question that we got was, is the government, the politicians, the policymakers, have they bought into the Mission de Sabios? Are they on the same page, or are we still persuading? And I just want to say something. This goes back to, first of all, I think that the administration did an incredible job. The government is definitely bought in. But this relates, in my opinion, to another question, which is that arrived in the chat, and that is, how do we ensure that what we are doing, that what the Mission de Sabio has done is going to last the changes of administrations, which we know between one government and another can be quite dramatic. Well, I just want to say something. Through the work that I have been leading and participating in, because there's tons of work that goes on in Colombia and the expertise is just incredible. You have done a lot of work from the bottom up. And that bottom-up approach and the mobilization of knowledge that you are creating and the collaboration that you have had for years with the Ministry of Science, which was previously called Ciencias, I think it's now finally consolidating a lot of the hard work and the foundation into actions. Some of these are the actions of the Mission de Sabios. And so what I believe is that you might not have buy-in 100%. You might have an occasional change in the administration that will leave perhaps a little bit of a gap. But because of the foundation, the strong network, and the bottom-up approach that I have seen you are using for building this bioeconomy strategy, and for building capacity at all different levels, and I'm talking at the level of talent, at the level of institutions, at the level of government as well, it will remain and it will not evaporate. And it's an important message I want to leave with everybody here, because specifically I want to address the news of the UK cutting the international development funds and essentially cutting all the work, all the funds that have contributed to this foundation. I'm going to say, this is what sustainability is. This is what legacy is. Foundations that are built on capacity building and from the bottom up do not disappear. Do not disappear because funds are cut, and they do not disappear because governments transition. So with this, I'd just like you to comment, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bueno, yo creo que sí es clara la voluntad política para trabajar en esto. Cómo garantizar que no sea voluntad política del gobierno de turno, porque estamos tratando de que quede como políticas públicas. Y de hecho, ya la misma misión está siendo base para planes de desarrollo. Todo lo que se está trabajando en la estrategia nacional de bioeconomía, sumado a la misma misión Bioeconomía Colombia que lanzó el ministerio, eso se busca que quede como política pública. Hemos visto el compromiso de todos los ministerios que están en esto directa o indirectamente, y hemos visto el compromiso y el apoyo de muchas instancias internacionales que apoyen esto. Entonces, yo creo que sí estamos convirtiéndolo en política pública estable. Tenemos muchos documentos de apoyo para todo esto. Hay diversos COMPES, que son los documentos aquí de política económica y social, que quedan. Eso no es del gobierno de turno. Estos documentos todos quedan como apoyo a todos estos movimientos. Entonces, yo pienso sinceramente que es un tema que ya ha calado no solo en las instancias gubernamentales. Distintos políticos están trabajando en esto, y hay políticos muy interesantes, muy solidarios con ciencia y tecnología, que han trabajado contra viento y marea para mantener esto. Entonces, yo creo que sí vamos a tener apoyo de los políticos, uno de los principales políticos que nos ha apoyado es el senador Iván Agudelo. Entonces yo pienso que sí hemos dado pasos importantes para que quede como política pública sólida, estable, no como plan del gobierno. Por otro lado, quiero ver si puedo compartir una diapositiva para responder a la pregunta que nos hicieron ¿se está viendo la diapositiva?
Sí, se está viendo y se ve el programa de PowerPoint de fondo.
Sí, sí, se ve bien, Elizabeth.
Yo creo que ese es el resumen de la respuesta, es que le estaba buscando de qué indicadores y hacia dónde vamos. Es duplicar la participación de la agricultura en el PIB, que es pasar del 6.7 al 13.4%, esto sería para 2030, con una participación del 20% en el empleo nacional. Ese es un indicador bien interesante en relación con empleo y mal que bien con indicadores económicos, que estoy de acuerdo, no debería ser el PIB, pero mientras lo cambiamos, seguimos funcionando con este indicador. El otro es el de aprovechar la biomasa residual, reduciendo por lo menos el 40%, con la mitad de estos volúmenes generando valor adicional, es decir, generando nuevos ingresos y nuevos empleos, nuevas empresas de base tecnológica. Y todo esto pues contribuye a la desaceleración de los efectos de cambio climático. Yo creo que ese es uno de los resúmenes más corticos que podemos hacer de las propuestas e indicadores que teníamos en la misión, pero todo esto sí se está acogiendo, todo esto está teniendo eco en el gobierno, en los gremios, en las universidades, de todas estas instancias han estado interesados y hemos estado dictando conferencias, tratando de transmitir este paradigma y estos valores para poder atender a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. So I think this is an incredible conversation, and I think I like to continue because there is a fabulous engagement from the audience. And Lionel, the next question is really for you, because in the last days of this workshop, people have been hearing that the Colombian industry is very conservative and not interested in investing in this type of projects to support the bioeconomy. And so people ask, could you give some example, some tangible example of how industry in the UK have incentivized investments in projects under this umbrella?
Yes, certainly. I think that's a common problem, and as I mentioned earlier, there's some nice words. There's one called the incumbents, which describes the industries that are now well established, and the insurgents. These are the ones, the small companies coming through that are going to challenge the incumbents. And to some extent, what we are seeing in the more cutting edge and therefore disruptive, transformative, and ultimately maybe the industries of the future are coming through as small companies, are ones that are really coming up with totally alternative ways to the established industry. So one thing certainly has been an emphasis from the government to support and make it easier for smaller companies to get involved. One indirect aspect of that is why we're looking at streamlining the regulations, not changing them to be less safe or less good for the environment, but to avoid unnecessary red tape or replication of demands, which can make it so difficult to do anything new that only the biggest companies can afford to do them. How to make it possible for others to at least demonstrate what is possible. So there's a bit about changing that, making it easier for more competition to compete with those established industries. The other thing that I mentioned was this sort of changing the playing field to create a new level playing field, one in which it is expected that, for example, if you you have to reduce your carbon footprint, and if you are a major industry, you will have to find some way to reduce that, and that will oblige them to reach out and find new ways. The policy of setting a net zero target has stimulated massive growth in the development of wind farms, for example. So, and that was an industry which was quite small, and now it's massively growing to a point where, for the first time in the last 200 years, more energy. Well, we haven't needed to use coal at all for energy. We can get it entirely from a combination of solar and wind at times, and increasingly proportionate. So by setting those big targets, new industries have to enter. So I think that obviously the environment in the UK and the environment in Colombia is in many ways very different. Our agricultural GDP is about 1%. The proportion of the population working in agriculture is about 1%. So we're focusing. So it's a very, very different environment. We're a very small and very densely populated country, and therefore we're focusing much more on the sort of technological end of things. But I think the principle of setting targets which everyone has to respond to is important. And I think quite simply this market pull, this recognition, whether it's through the social media or whatever, that customers start to ask questions, means that industries are now having to think again. And you only need one industry to change the pattern, and suddenly the others have to follow. So I think one thing you want to try and do is, are there what I call trailblazers? Are there certain industries that could demonstrate you can do something more sustainably? Can you provide things which meat that doesn't somehow finish up, resulting in deforestation or whatever? We need to have those demonstration solutions. If you can demonstrate them, then it becomes much more difficult for others to compete on old terms, because everybody expects the new ones. So you are stimulating that market pull, if you like.
Thank you. There is a topic that I think it's really important in our conversation on this, that has been brought up in the chat, and that I'd like to spend a few minutes on before we move to a final topic of technology. There is, somebody has brought up, the consumer perspective. I mean, they made the Colombian sort of example of the textile industry, and that causes a lot of contamination of the environment. And they were asking, how do we incentivize consumers? And that's a very interesting one. So, and I think this comes a long way with other work that we have been doing through our work in sustainable bioeconomy in Colombia. And organize the engagement with the public, and the education, training, engagement with the public are absolutely key. One of the things that we have learned is that this cannot, whatever advancement and innovation we work on, we also need to bring our public with us. We, in our program Grow Colombia, in collaboration with many partners and University of Los Andes, one of these very important partners, we have carried out public engagement with the Eden Project in the UK. They are absolutely fantastic at what they do and very well renowned, and have reached thousands and thousands of children in underrepresented school in Colombia, where we have tried to tell them about science and science innovation and biodiversity and the contribution to their growth and their society and their environment. And this is just one example, by the way, but it has to happen at many different levels to create an understanding and a responsibility within the public. Elizabeth, would you like to comment on this a little bit?
Sorry. Volvemos al punto de la importancia de atraer a todos los miembros de la sociedad a esto. Este cambio transformativo, disruptivo, solo puede darse si todos y cada uno de los miembros sabe su papel, responde y es proactivo. No podemos seguir sentándonos a culpar al gobierno, al Estado, a las universidades, a los investigadores. No, todo esto es el esfuerzo conjunto. Por eso fue mi última diapositiva de cómo tenemos que trabajar en equipo para lograr algo. Aquí, como dijo Federica, tenemos que trabajar muchísimo en comunicación, en divulgación, en concientización de toda la sociedad. Tenemos que trabajar fuertemente en percepción pública. Tenemos que trabajar en el empoderamiento de todos y cada uno de los miembros de la sociedad para que respondan, jueguen su papel y colaboren a concientizar a los demás. Entonces, sí, definitivamente, pero para eso sí necesitamos políticas públicas sólidas, fuertes, que nos apoyen y que nos ayuden y que permanentemente estén enviando mensajes a toda la sociedad sobre cómo podemos construir todo este nuevo paradigma.
Thank you. Lionel, anything from you with regard to the experience of the UK with involving the public?
Interestingly enough, before we went public in deliberately supporting this cutting edge gene editing technology and synthetic biology, we actually commissioned an independent public dialogue, went out to people and said, if we were able to do this or were able to do that, what would you think? And so there was very much a reaching out to the public before and until the response of that had been brought back, and we recognized that there was an appetite from the public for the use of these technologies, not least in healthcare, but they could recognize it had value in other areas. Only then did the government agree to put money in, and I got involved in writing the roadmap for the country and everything else that's happened since. We then wondered, how do we continue to engage with the public? We realized that's been more difficult. Insofar as if you just go to the public and say, do you think this in a very some broadly defined piece of science is a good thing? You'd spend so long trying to describe to them what the science is and they're not really in a position to answer it. So it's very difficult to ask the question. And so my personal view and the way we've approached it is we actually need to have worked examples. So you can start to say, we could do this. these were the benefits, these are the concerns, what do you think? And so you need to actively go out. And I think if nothing else, it certainly helps to gauge people's thinking. At this very present moment, the deadline was 2 days ago, so I am talking about very recent. The question about changing the UK regulations to allow more gene editing of crops has gone out to the public, and the deadline was 2 days ago. So I don't know the result yet, but it's already stimulated a lot of discussion. And what it's shown is that what I've certainly seen is a shift in public interest as they become more educated. They are much more aware of the problems of sustainability and climate change, so when they're then asked, would you be concerned with eating something which had been a result of some gene editing, they're much more, if it's healthier, if it meets the regulations, if it meets the food safety standards, why wouldn't I? You know, but it has to have an advantage. You don't do it just because it's technical. You do it because they will feel better. The public will, an individual, you know, if it makes you feel better, well, I could eat this apple or I could eat that apple, but this apple happens to be better for the environment. You know, I will feel better doing it. So there's a certain link between understanding and how that goes. Equally well, they'd say, no, we don't want to do things which are perhaps very just cosmetic. We don't want designer things, people tinkering with genetics just for the fun of it. So you start to see the lines drawn, but engagement with the society, with constantly going out, engaging. What are their concerns? Their concerns are always real. You may disagree with their concerns, you may think they're misinformed, but nevertheless they are real. Unless you take them seriously, unless you try to understand what those concerns are, you will hit a public backlash and you will fail to move forward. And hearing what you're saying, clearly your food distribution, the fact you have these farmer markets, you have these smaller grocery stores, these will inevitably, I'm sure, be very conservative. They know how things have always been done. They know how they should be done. Why would they want to change? Any change is seen with suspicion. Maybe it's associated with science they don't understand or industries they don't trust. I think this could be a major challenge. And the sooner you start to engage with society, then that will help. We've even had it, I'm sure you've had it the same with the vaccine. And the COVID-19, a wonderful worked example, a terrible example, and yet it sort of brings to the forefront this idea that some people say, right, I want the vaccine, I want to be safe, and others are concerned for reasons that may not be obvious to you as a scientist. But once you start to engage with them, sometimes what we found in this country is that the majority of people who refused to have the vaccine initially were refusing it for reasons that once the thing had been discussed and explained, is, oh, that's okay, I didn't understand. Now I understand, now I'm happy. And it's about reaching across so people feel that they have been, you've given the time to listen and you've given the time to explain. And I think we need to do more outreach and engage. So I think this is really, really critical. Yeah. So a long answer, but hopefully important, helpful.
Thank you, Lionel. We have just 8 minutes, just under 10 minutes, I think, left of our conversation. And so I would like to touch upon a theme, which is technology. We've had a few questions related to this. One was to me, so I'll begin this conversation and I'll start with my answer. And the question was, how does genomic or any genomic technology contributes to the development of this sustainable bioeconomy. I've dedicated my career to understanding how genomic can transform life, both in the health sector and of late in the environmental sector. So I believe that has a tremendous contribution. We have all been aware of the transformative effect of the results of the Human Genome Project 15 years, now 20 years ago, and what has come out of that, and the opportunity for now, today, to personalize medicine and the opportunity to really transform healthcare with diagnosis and treatment. We have seen, of course, in this pandemic itself, how genomic has been key in the surveillance piece, how it's been key in ensuring that we had a vaccine, and how it will continue to be key to catch up with the emergence of new variants. And in the environmental sector, genomics, the environmental sector and the natural resources sector is compared to the health sector less mature. But nevertheless, we know that this pandemic has brought forward, as we have discussed on this panel today, many important issues such as the sustainability and how do we reach a healthy, competitive and resource-based bioeconomy in the future. This is something that not only Colombia is looking at, but every country is looking at right now. And the context, of course, are very different. In Colombia, I think, like in other countries, genomics is the foundation piece to this, is the availability of genome sequences from the diversity of life that will really accelerate discovery and innovation in an unprecedented way. And it will certainly lead to a flourishing of markets and industry, as we have seen this already happen. And for sure, I think to an increase in job and profitability. We do need education about this, and in terms of Colombia, in the context of Colombia, genomics can have a tremendous regional component. Colombia has been building capacity in basic and foundational genomics with their Colombia Bio program now for years, and the launch of the Colombia Bio 2 program to collect, characterize diversity that will not only be useful for Colombia itself in terms of how this sequence data and this knowledge will be used by engineering biology and synthetic biology, but it will also be extremely important on an international level, because I like to remind everybody that this is where we're going to get is these biodiverse countries like Colombia, that we will get the next antibiotics, and that we will get, our medicines and products. So I think that the opportunity is fundamental. We have to take it in step, building capacity that is at the level of skills and talent, that is at the level of capacity, institutional capacity, is at the level of national, regional capacity and national capacity. And I think Colombia is on a fantastic path to achieve this. Each region, and I have been, this workshop has been organized, as you have heard from the introduction, under the GCRF cluster, meeting the policy challenges for a sustainable bioeconomy in Colombia. We have an aim to actually propose and identify pilots in 4 regions in Colombia, or how exactly this biodiversity and this genomics can demonstrate the utility for a bioeconomy. Each region provides different niches and different aspects on how to do this incredibly well. I visited many regions in Colombia, and I have been astonished of, there are some, I visited Valle del Cauca, as an example, or Antioquia, and I just want to tell you that, and there are others, But I just want to tell you that it's incredible in some areas where already the right approaches are being used, such as the complete integration of industry and academic research. You know, and they are extremely dynamic regions, and I think that resourcing, building more capacity, but perhaps there is one challenge, and that is the challenge of scaling up. How do you scale up? And I think that in Colombia, the scaling up, it's an important question and topic that requires a little bit of thought, because for a country like Colombia to build capacity for scaling up in many of these endeavors may require another 15 years as well as resources. And there are scaling up facilities that are available globally. And this pandemic has shown us how the global international collaboration piece is really useful. So while Colombia should continue to build capacity, so I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't, they should continue, they should also avail from what's available in order to speed up their bioeconomy. And I would like for Elizabeth to comment that this was my answer as my experience, but of course Elizabeth is the right person to comment here.
Gracias, Federica. Sí, yo creo que el scaling up es una limitante que tenemos y que es súper necesaria para todo esto del desarrollo regional y territorial, porque además puede ya trascender para escalas mayores para exportación, por ejemplo. Entonces sí, eso necesitamos hacerlo. Definitivamente aquí nos queda clarísimo que el conocimiento, que todos los avances en ciencia y tecnología son fundamentales para implementar adecuada y rápidamente este camino de la bioeconomía, que es nuestra opción viable, nuestra opción racional para conservar, pero aprovechar también los recursos naturales. Para esto sí necesitamos que todas las instancias estatales fortalezcan lo que es la financiación de todas estas actividades, que nos ayuden también a engranarnos, a unirnos con la industria para poder sacar resultados más favorables, pero no toda la financiación tiene que venir del Estado. Tiene que haber capital privado que emprenda en esto, porque es muy promisorio, entonces va a dar réditos muy rápidamente. Entonces tenemos que mantener una fuerte financiación del Estado, pero promover también una financiación de capital privado, porque en últimas es un negocio sostenible. La bioeconomía, si no es sostenible ambiental, social y económicamente, no es viable. Entonces son todas situaciones que tenemos que mantener y fortalecer. Y el punto final que diría yo es mantener una interacción fluida con la sociedad. Lionel nos comentaba de charlas y divulgaciones que hacía con la sociedad. Lo que pasa es que a veces nosotros, estando del lado de los investigadores, lo que pretendemos es entregar información y no más. Para interactuar con la sociedad tenemos que recibir cuáles son sus inquietudes, cuáles son sus curiosidades y no darles lo que no les interesa, sino de verdad que haya la comunicación es de doble vía, o si no es entrega de información. Tenemos que mantener esos canales de doble vía abiertos con toda la sociedad y así vamos a poder trabajar y caminar mucho más fluidamente en este maravilloso camino que es la bioeconomía.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I would like to close this panel with one last comment from Lionel and his expertise in synthetic biology, and perhaps comment on how is synthetic biology going to help us accelerate the bioeconomy in Colombia.
Thank you very much. 2 quick points, not much time. I could talk for an hour on that one, but I will try not to. Firstly, we've noticed with the COVID that suddenly the Chinese were able to send a sequence across around the world. People were able to synthesize from that and create viruses in a matter that in vaccines, they had potential vaccines within 2 weeks, which would have taken 2 years previously. So we know it can make massive difference, and that's a global interaction as well. So there's certainly one thing we can do is work out how we can work together. We do have the science, without a doubt, which I'm sure is complementary to your own expertise and skills. You have the biodiversity. You have the sequences which maybe together we can help to find out where the opportunities are. There's no doubt that there are lots of things that are very important to society, the growing of coffee, the growing of bananas, and so on. And at the same time, we know that there are pathogens which need to be dealt with, and we have the capabilities to work together and use the latest technology, such as synthetic biology, to work out how to put pathogen resistance into certain things, for example. So why not work together on that? We're the end customer for those products. We want you to be able to make them and grow them. The other thing to recognize, and it's not always understood by the general public, is that so much of crop breeding has inevitably been entirely empirical, trial and error, because biology was just too complicated. It was impossible to really understand. With the latest genomics, synthesis, synthetic biology and the like, we can now address that and therefore be more scientific and be more direct. If we need to help to develop something to be more resistant to climate change, we can be much clearer how to do that. And get the function we want without the off target. So it's just helping to make us get where we want to much more efficiently than if we didn't understand the genomics that we now do. So I think we're very much at an early stage, but I think working together, sharing sequences, technologies, it has to be the way forward. And I think it's a very exciting opportunity for us. So I very much hope that we can build on the wonderful engagement that the UK and Colombia has had as represented by our meeting today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. You've been a fabulous audience with all of your questions. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Lionel. This was a really informative and engaging conversation. I really privileged to have participated and moderated this. I wish you a very good day. I also want to conclude by wishing everybody a safe future. I do know we've had this very interesting bioeconomy focused conversation and workshop all week, but we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I wish everyone well, and I wish everyone to take care and take time to reflect during these times. All the best, and well done, everybody.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the opportunity. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Bueno, damos por concluida la última sesión sobre gobernanza de este taller Estado de la Bioeconomía en Colombia. Agradecemos a Federica, a Elizabeth y a Lion por sus aportes para esta conversación tan interesante. Creo que surgieron y conectaron temas que se han tratado a lo largo de las discusiones y de las cuales refuerzo, por ejemplo, la importancia de involucrar al público en la toma de decisiones, en dirigir el destino de la tecnología, la importancia del cambio climático, la descarbonización en la bioeconomía y lo último que se está haciendo en políticas de bioeconomía, por mencionar algunos temas. Agradecemos también al público por su activa participación e interés. Esperamos que estas discusiones les hayan dejado inquietudes que podamos seguir trabajando de manera conjunta más adelante. Voy a cambiar en inglés para saludar y despedir a Lionel y a Federica. So Lionel and Federica, We're very pleased and we were thrilled with your participation in this workshop. We're very enthusiastic about future opportunities, and we're sure to have taken note of all the lessons you have provided. So thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to keep in touch. So I'm going to switch to Spanish. Les recuerdo que en la tarde tendremos el conversatorio Desafíos y oportunidades para la bioeconomía en la Orinoquía, que hace parte de la serie de conversatorios sobre las 4 regiones que estamos trabajando en este proyecto de clusters. Para este último conversatorio contaremos con la participación de Clara Serrano de Azorinoquía, Nelson Barragán del Atol Aurora, Laura Miranda de la Fundación Cunaguaro, Sergio Iván Muñoz de la Gobernación del Meta y Óscar Eduardo Suárez de la Universidad Nacional, sede Orinoquía. Este conversatorio será moderado por Mario Murcia del Instituto Humboldt. Estamos seguros que será una discusión muy interesante sobre todo lo que está pasando en esta región en términos de bioeconomía. El enlace de la sesión de esta tarde lo encontrarán en el mensaje de confirmación del evento que llegará a sus correos electrónicos y nos vemos en unas 3 horas a las 2 de la tarde para continuar con estas discusiones tan interesantes. Gracias por sus aportes y por su participación.